These. That's one of those big, I wouldn't call it a 25-cent word. I'd call it maybe a 15-cent word. Its twin is ecclesiastical. Neither of those two words are found in high use on the street or the sidewalk. So we want to start with asking, what does that word mean, and why is this book entitled Ecclesiastes? Anybody have any thoughts? What does ecclesiastical mean? That one actually is a little bit more common than Ecclesiastes is ecclesiastical, which is just a form of that same word. No one. And I'm not sure that we're online yet, is it? Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, but it's not even alerted me. There we go. Now I see it. Edna is watching, but no comments. No answer to the question of. Miss Sheila's watching. No comments. What does Ecclesiastes mean? Any thoughts? Ecclesiastes is actually a transliteration. It's not a originally English word. It's a created English word. A transliteration of the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew title. The Hebrew title is Koheleth. And we're going to see that name possibly as we read. But Koheleth is a word which apparently means to assemble as a congregation. You might notice a similarity between Ecclesiastes and ecclesia. Ecclesia is that Greek term that we translate in the New Testament with what word? We don't translate it, but the translators of the New Testament translate into English what for the word ecclesia? The called out, usually church, is what you see in most English translations when that Greek word is there. It's the same, or it's a connected word, I guess, to that word. And so it means to assemble a congregation. Many people believe that it means to assemble a congregation for the purpose of receiving a message. And so as it's translated in this book, there's also the identification of the preacher. That title is used at the very opening of the book, the words of the preacher. Some people translate that convener or collector. Obviously, that's where we get Koheleth, and that's eventually where we get Ecclesiastes from after it makes several trips through Greek and then Latin and then English. We get Ecclesiastes. But anyway, Martin Luther rendered the title of this book Der Preger, which simply means the preacher. That's what he titled it. And then we see that Koheleth, or the preacher, or however you want to translate that, introduces himself in verse 1 as, it says, the words of the preacher, and he gives us two qualities about himself, son of David and king in Jerusalem. Is the writer of this book ever identified in the pages of the book? Not by name. This is as much information as we get. Son of David, king in Jerusalem. Most people assume from that who wrote the book. Anyone? Solomon. That is what the general belief was for a long, long time. There has been some more modern, and I say more modern, they're not really modern to us, 17th century scholarship and on, suggests that this actually is a much later book than it was originally believed, and that it wasn't written by Solomon. Some of them go so far as to suggest that it was written by a individual who was posing as Solomon, and therefore it's a forgery. And since there are no direct quotes in the New Testament from this book, there are some who even question whether or not it's inspired. I don't have those kinds of questions all that much. First off, the whole argument of trying to figure out what human writer there was, generally to me is a pointless exercise if the person isn't identified. If God wants us to know who it is that is penning the letter, then it usually begins with that information. The books like Hebrews and Ecclesiastes and others that never identify who the author is, I don't have a problem with not having the human writer identified. I believe that they're inspired of God, and that's what really matters. But I think it's fair to spend a little bit of time looking at some things to answer any doubts that might be out there about whether or not Ecclesiastes is consistent with the rest of Revelation. If the information written in this book is in direct contrast in some way, where the context doesn't make sense out of it, and it doesn't correlate with the other things that are inspired, then we might have a question. But if there is a set of parallel and consistent doctrines that can be seen in this book and can be seen throughout the Bible, and particularly in the New Testament as well, I have no issue with the book. And so let's look real quickly, before we get into a direct study of the book itself, at comparison of a few things in the book of Ecclesiastes with a few things that are written in the New Testament. Look at first at Ecclesiastes chapter 11 and verse 1. Now, this is kind of poetic language, but I'm going to read this, and then we're going to read a passage in the New Testament, and we're going to ask whether or not this at least is teaching in general principle the same idea. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. And so, in understanding what that means, let's read another New Testament passage and ask whether or not that's possible understanding of what the writer in Ecclesiastes 11:1 is saying. In Galatians 6 and verse 7, in this letter it says, "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, this he will also reap." And that's a clear doctrine that can actually be established in many places in the Scripture, that the things that people do will revisit them. That if you sow to the flesh, what are you going to reap? By the way, that's verse 8 of Galatians 6. If you sow to the flesh, what are you going to reap? The corruption that is from fleshly things. But if you sow to the Spirit, then you'll reap, he says, eternal life. And so the idea being that the practices that we engage in have consequences. And the consequences will come back and find us. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. The actions that you take today will come back. They'll eventually come back on you. You'll have to answer for them. And that's at least one understanding of Ecclesiastes 11:1. Chapter 11, remaining there, verses 9 and 10, the last two verses of this chapter. "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart, in the sight of your eyes, the days of your youth. But know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart, put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Now, flip over to your New Testaments. Go to the second letter to Timothy. 2 Timothy chapter 2. And let's... I must have chose the wrong connection on that one. So we're gonna let's drop that one. I'll have to go back and revisit that one. I'll make a note. I connected that to the wrong thing. So let's go back to Ecclesiastes for a moment. Or at least I think I did. I might read it after class and go, oh yeah, that was exactly what I wanted. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 2. There's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what's planted. You read that whole list. There's a time for everything. But did you notice what it says? There's a time to be born and a time to die, right? What does Hebrews 9 in verse 27 tell us? That it is appointed unto man to what? To die. That's just a part of being born. The minute you're born into the world, what are you certain to experience? The end of your worldly existence. And so those are consistent things. Ecclesiastes 5, starting in verse 10. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. What advantage has their owner but to see them with his own eyes? Sweet is the sleep of the laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. Let's look in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, and verses 16 and following. Look what Jesus taught here. He told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, what shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? He said, I'll do this. I'll tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I'll store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. And so in Ecclesiastes 5, we have this warning about the futility or the vanity of having large amounts of wealth. That other people come and eat it up, and you get to see it, but you may not get to use it. And that's exactly what Jesus taught in Luke 12. And we'll also look at 1 Timothy chapter 6 in verse 10 in connection with this. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It's through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Did you notice the end of what we read from Ecclesiastes 5? That the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. The full stomach of the blessings of this earth can very well cause what? Problems rather than help. And spiritually, that's exactly what Timothy's being warned. That because of the craving that people have for wealth, they wander away from faith. And there's a price to pay. In another place, Jesus said that it's going to be what? Easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into heaven. In other words, we tend to think that wealth is a solution to problems, and yet the book of Ecclesiastes says that it's not, and that having and amassing wealth can be a vain thing, which is exactly what Jesus taught and exactly what other places in the New Testament teach pertaining to those things. What about our worship and how we should speak and whether we should be thoughtful, I guess, in our speech. Going back to Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 2, be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven and you on earth, therefore let your words be few. What is Ecclesiastes 5:2 telling us? That we should be thoughtful, that we should be careful about particularly what we say and how we approach God. God's in heaven. We're on the earth. So we had better be cautious or thoughtful about what it is we say or do in response to Him. Look at Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 7. When you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think they'll be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. So, let your words be few, is what the Ecclesiastes writer said. When you draw near to God, don't be rash with your mouth. Don't be hasty to utter words. Let your words be few. And what did Jesus teach about when we draw before God and speak to God? Don't heap up words and empty phrases and think that we're going to be heard for your many words, but rather let your words be few. And so we've got parallel doctrine about our worship, our prayers. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse, 16. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. Is that right? Did I read the right verse? 3:16. I didn't. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. And so justice and righteousness, do they always happen in time on the earth? Let me ask it this way. As long as we're alive, are we going to experience both righteousness and unrighteousness, justice and injustice, good and evil? Yeah, that's what he's saying in Ecclesiastes 3:16. So these things exist and coexist side by side, and you're not always going to see justice and good, that sometimes evil is going to be right there with it. Now notice what Jesus taught. Matthew chapter 13 and verse 24 and following. He put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, the weeds appeared also. The servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? And he said, an enemy has done this. So the servants said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? But he said, no, lest gathering the weeds, you root up the wheat also with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at the harvest time, I'll tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. As long as we're alive on this earth, as long as we exist on this earth, what's going to be present? Good and evil. And we're not even going to be able to escape that within the garden of God, within the planting of God. Jesus says he went out and this master sowed this seed, and he sowed good seed, but what came up amongst them? Weeds came up amongst them because the evil one was also sowing. So we're not even guaranteed right here among the righteous to be isolated from all wrongdoing, which is essentially the exact same thing that the writer of Ecclesiastes was saying. That where you would expect to see righteousness, instead you see injustice. And so these are parallel. doctrines. They're consistent. It hasn't ever changed. The message hasn't ever changed. What about contentment with life? Look at Ephesians chapter 5. Once again, let's look at verses 16 through 18. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them, to accept his lot, to rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with the joy of his heart. And so, ultimately, Ecclesiastes there says what? We need to be content with the circumstances of life, right? Whatever your work is, whatever your toil is, be satisfied with it. Whatever you have, be satisfied with it. If you're blessed and you do have an abundance, we'll enjoy that too. It's the lot that you have in life. Well, let's look at Hebrews 13:5 for one place. Keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. Be content with what you have. What did he say back in Ecclesiastes 5? Be content with your possessions. Enjoy them. It's good and fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days that he has, that God has given him, for this is his lot. Be content with the circumstances that you find yourself in. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 8. If we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. Be satisfied with the lot in which life brings you. Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. Not that I'm speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. Which is exactly what Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 16 through 18 is saying. Whatever your lot, be satisfied with what you have. Be satisfied with the food. Be satisfied with your toil. Everyone to whom God has given wealth and possessions, be satisfied with that. So I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, he goes on to say, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. And so this is a consistent teaching in Ecclesiastes and in the New Testament. Finally, again to Ecclesiastes 5, verses 6 and 7 this time. Let not your mouth lead you into sin. Do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For when dreams increase and words grow many, there is vanity, but God is the one you must fear. And what he's saying there in a nutshell is don't run your mouth. Don't be hasty. Don't destroy your relationship with God over the things that you say. And as we rely upon ourselves, as our dreams increase and our words grow many, there's vanity in that. And so this is a warning about being slow to speak and being thoughtful and being mindful that God is in control. Look at James chapter 1. James chapter 1, verses 19 through 21. The New Testament teaches, know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore put away all filthiness rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. Don't dream up things for yourself. Be quiet and listen to God. James taught that. The book of Ecclesiastes teaches that. And you can just continue to do this throughout the whole book. Over and over and over again, you can see the parallels and consistencies between what this book teaches and what the balance of the Scriptures teach about life. Now, we do need to remember that the writer states that he has applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. We're going to read that, the opening of this book. Why is it important to remember that he has applied his heart to seek and to search out all that is done under heaven? Because this is not just a list of those things which are noble and righteous and honorable. He's going to talk about vain things, useless things, things that cause problems. It's the lot of man. This is an extremely practical book about all that we experience in life. And there's not anything that we can experience in life that will catch us by surprise if we study this book and internalize these things and have our eyes open for it. And then when we see these things, when they're identified as being vanity and striving after the wind and useless pursuits, when we see them, what do we know not to do? Waste a whole lot of our life looking for them, or trying to attain them or gain them. And so there's a negative aspect of things where he identifies these things when he gets through with them, after he analyzes them all and he applies his heart and searches through them out by wisdom, and he finds these and he goes through and he analyzes. Then he'll get to the end and say, yeah, this too is striving after the wind. That was a waste of time. That doesn't help. That doesn't satisfy the purpose of man. So it's written to examine the value of all human behavior. Yes, sir. I can appreciate that. I've been there, done that book. Now, I want to say this. It's certainly presented as I did this, but it doesn't necessarily require that the writer actually did all of these things that he talks about. It requires that he examined and considered all of these things, and he looked at them, and he thought about them, and he drew conclusions about the behavior. Some of these things he certainly did, especially if it was Solomon. We can draw some parallels in Solomon's life to some of the things that are here and go, yeah, that was experience talking there. But it is a what is book, not a what should be book. Do you understand the distinction that I'm making between those two ideas? A what is book as opposed to a what should be book? This is a very practical discussion about what men do and what men experience, not an idyllic discussion of what men should do and what men could experience if they did what was right. Because, let's face it, a lot of things exist in the world, and we do a lot of those things, and we get through and realize that we've wasted a lot of time. I've got a relatively new friend on Facebook that this person sent me a friend request. I think she's a member of the church. I'm not sure where she lives. But she made some drastic life changes she talks about on her Facebook page. And one of the things that struck me was her talking about how much time she wasted. And now that she has opened her eyes and she sees that behavior and that pursuit was empty and vain, she views all of that time that she spent pursuing those things, that's time I'm never going to get back. How many days does a man have on the earth? Micah, pull up your calculator. How many days does a man have on the earth? There's 365 and a quarter days in a year. Type in 365.25 times. The scripture says that a man's lifespan is what? 70 years. That's the general lifespan for man. 70 to 80 years. Let's split the difference. Let's say 75 years. 365 and a quarter times 75 is what? 27,000 days. That's it. That's what you got. If you spend 10,000 of those days pursuing something that is empty and pointless and doesn't lead anywhere, when you get to the end of your life, what do you think? Wow. What could have been different if I had used those days, instead of pursuing those vain and empty things, if I had used them pursuing good things? Things that bear fruit, things that have a purpose, things that endure. That's what this book is about. To get us to read and to think and to meditate about all of those things and ask ourselves, wait a minute, am I wasting my limited number of days on the earth pursuing those kinds of things? Or am I pursuing these other kinds of things that he identifies as being worthwhile and useful and the duty of man? There's a lot of people that die with regrets. We have no reason to die with regrets if we familiarize ourselves with this book and we use the time that we have wisely. By the way, is that a principle taught in the New Testament? Be circumspect in the way you walk, making use of the time, because the days are evil. Time is limited. All Satan has to get me to do is what? Waste my life. That's all he has to get me to do. If I waste my life pursuing empty things, his goal is accomplished. God's is not. He doesn't have to persuade us actually to do anything. All Satan really has to do is persuade us to what? To do nothing. You remember the one-talent man? He came back to the Lord and said, "Here I have what is yours." He's called a wicked and lazy slave. Why was he wicked and lazy? Because he did nothing. All that has to happen is for our time to be wasted. And so this is a book that helps teach us how to make good use of those limited number of days that we have on the earth. What was that number again? Micah? What was that number again? 27,300 and some odd days. And that's if you live a full life. A lot of people don't make it to 75. They have even fewer days. We have to think about those kinds of things. So we hold our tongue and we listen to God and we seek to know what the purpose of man is, the telos. There's the fancy word for it, telos. That just means what? The ultimate aim. What is the ultimate aim of man? End of our book, chapter 12. Verse 13. Someone like to read that verse for me? Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is man's all, or this is the whole duty of man. This is the purpose, this is the aim, this is the ultimate. Now listen, how can I fear God and keep His commandments? There's only one way that that's possible. In order to keep the commandments of God, what must happen? What is necessary to infer a person spends his life doing? All right, let's ask it this way. If you come over to my house tomorrow, what do I want you to do when you get there? How are you going to know what I want you to do unless what? Okay, I have to tell you what I want you to do in order for you to know what I want you to do and do it. And when I do tell you, what do you have to do? You have to listen. And if you haven't heard what I want you to do, what are you going to do when you see me? Somebody's already mentioned it. You're going to ask, what is it you would like me to do? Why have you asked me to come over here? What am I supposed to do? What's the purpose for my being here? The only way that we can fear God and keep His commandments is if we know what His commandments are. And if we don't know what it is that He would have us to do, then we need to what? We need to find out. We need to ask. And how do we ask, or how do we find out? It's right here. It's once for all been delivered. He's revealed unto us all things that pertain to life and godliness. The things that He has revealed, Deuteronomy 29:29, He says, belong to us and belong to our children, and our duty is to search them out and to teach them and to know what they are. What about the things that He hasn't revealed? Those secret things, they still belong to Him. Not our business. Chasing after those secret things, that's vanity and striving after the wind. Trying to find out answers to things that you can't get the answer to. If I spend all my time trying to answer questions that can't be answered, what am I not going to do? Answer the ones that can. So, it becomes very important to seek to know what He has said and not allow ourselves to be sidetracked on discussions about what He has not said. And I promise you, there's enough of what He has said to occupy your time for your entire lifetime. And it's the whole duty of man to respect God's word, fear God, and to follow it and keep His commandments. This is the whole of man. He answers the question, what is not vain, at the very end of the book. So he talks about all these different things and comes to the conclusion, well, that's vanity, and this doesn't help, and this isn't any good, and this is a waste of time. Oh, here's something that's not a waste of time. This has a purpose to it. This fulfills our duty and purpose for being here. And I find it fascinating, absolutely fascinating, that that's the very thing that we spend the least amount of our lives pursuing. How many hours a week do we make sure that our kids get instruction in mathematics, get instruction in English, get instruction in history? I'm not saying it's not important to get an education. I'm asking how many hours do we insist that they receive instruction, and how many hours do we spend pursuing a knowledge of what God has spoken, comparably? We need to think about those kinds of things. Nothing earthly is our ultimate aim. That's one of the things that this book teaches us. And heaven is not our ultimate aim. That's our inheritance. It's our reward. Fellowship with God. That's what becomes clear in this book, is that fellowship with God, walking with God, fearing God, keeping God's commandments, walking in righteousness with Him, that is our ultimate aim. And if we walk with Him, we will realize our true purpose. I don't have time to read it because we're out of time already, but look at 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 and 7. You can write that down, 1 Peter 5, verses 6 and 7. Look at that on your own time, and we'll see the importance of that.